The newspaper clipping in Michael Davis's wallet was worn thin from being unfolded so many times. "Local child dies in hit-and-run accident," the headline read. Dated 5 years ago today. He sat in the family Feud waiting area fingering the article that contained the only photo of 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez he'd ever seen. The child whose life he'd ended in a moment of panic and cowardice. "You seem nervous," his brother Tony said quietly beside him. Michael nodded, though Tony had no idea why his hands were shaking or why he'd been drinking heavily for the past week. This was supposed to be fun, a distraction from the anniversary that haunted him every September 15th, but nothing could distract him from what he'd done. The Davis family from Phoenix had been selected after Tony submitted their application months ago. It was his attempt to help Michael reconnect with life, to pull him out of the depression that had consumed him for 5 years. The prize money would be nice, but mostly Tony wanted to see his brother laugh again, not knowing that laughter had died with a little girl on Maple Street. Steve Harvey's voice filled the studio as the cameras prepared to roll. The energy was infectious and celebratory, designed to make families feel blessed and victorious, but Michael carried the weight of being a killer who had never been caught. A murderer hiding behind a smile and a secret that grew heavier every day. He wore a black shirt that matched his mood and the color he'd been wearing inside his heart for 5 years. Every day was a funeral for the child he'd killed and the man he used to be before that rainy September evening when everything changed. His reflection in mirrors had become that of a stranger, a coward, who'd chosen self-preservation over justice. The game began with its usual excitement. The Davis family faced the Martinez family from California in what should have been a joyful competition. Steve worked his magic, drawing laughs and creating those moments of connection that made the show special. Michael stood at the end of his family's podium. He tried to participate when the cameras focused on him, but every moment felt like a performance of normalcy over a foundation of rotting guilt. How could he smile when Emma Rodriguez would never smile again? "Survey says," Steve announced as the first round progressed. The Davis family was doing well, their answers lighting up the board with encouraging frequency. Tony kept glancing at his brother, hoping to see some spark of joy but noticing only the hollow look that had lived in Michael's eyes for years. The studio lights were bright and cheerful. For most contestants, they represented excitement and possibility. For Michael, they felt like interrogation lamps, like the kind that would shine on him if anyone ever discovered what he'd done that rainy night 5 years ago. During a commercial break, Steve worked the audience as he always did. His natural charisma filled the studio, making strangers feel like family. He noticed Michael immediately, standing quietly, while darkness seemed to radiate from his very presence. There was something in his posture that caught Steve's attention. The way he held himself like someone carrying invisible weight, like someone who had done something unforgivable and was drowning in the consequences. Steve had learned to read people over decades of television, and Michael was consumed by something toxic. "You doing all right over there?" Steve asked during the break, walking toward the Davis family podium. Michael managed a forced smile that carried more pain than happiness. "Just trying to get through the day," he replied, unconsciously touching the newspaper clipping in his pocket. Tony stepped closer to his brother protectively. "He's been having a tough time lately," he said, not understanding that every day had been tough for Michael since he'd driven away from a dying child. Some kind of anniversary that gets him down every year. The cameras came back on. Steve returned to his position, but his eyes kept drifting to Michael throughout the next round. His family was winning, but he seemed disconnected from their success, present but lost in a hell of his own making. The fast money round arrived. Tony went first and scored 163 points. The family needed only 37 more points to win the $20,000, money that could never buy back what Michael had stolen from the world. Michael stepped up to the podium. His family cheered behind him, but he barely heard them through the sound of screeching brakes and impact that played in his mind every waking moment. The bright lights felt overwhelming, the studio audience vast, the pressure mounting like the weight of a child's body under his car. "All right, Michael," Steve said, his voice carrying its usual warmth, but somehow reaching through Michael's defenses. "You need 37 points to win for your family. You ready?" Michael nodded, though his hands trembled as he gripped the podium, remembering other grips on a steering wheel in the rain. The questions began with what felt like cosmic cruelty. "Name something people do when they're scared." "Run away," Michael answered automatically, the words cutting through his soul like glass. He had run away, literally and figuratively, from the worst moment of his life. "Name something that haunts people." "The past." "Name something people try to forget." "Mistakes." Each answer came from a place of intimate knowledge, from someone who lived every day with the consequences of a split-second decision that had destroyed 2 lives, Emma's and his own. "Name something people confess." Michael hesitated, thinking of all the times he'd driven to police stations, but never gone inside. "Sins," he said quietly, the word carrying the weight of 5 years of hidden truth. "Final question, Michael. What keeps you awake at night?" The question hit him like the impact he'd tried to forget. Michael's face went completely white as he stared at Steve. The carefully constructed walls he'd built around his secret began crumbling under the pressure of a truth that wanted desperately to be spoken. The studio waited. His family waited. But Michael couldn't speak because the question had reached into the core of his guilt and demanded an answer he'd never been brave enough to give. Michael started, then stopped. His breathing became labored as 5 years of suppressed confession began rising in his chest. The bright lights suddenly felt like headlights in the rain, the audience like witnesses to the crime he'd committed. "The child I killed," he whispered, so quietly the microphones barely picked it up. But the cameras caught everything. The way his face collapsed, the tears that started flowing, the way he seemed to shrink under the weight of finally speaking the truth. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of episodes. He'd seen contestants struggle with difficult questions, seen them get emotional, seen them freeze under pressure. But this was different. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. He set down his cards and walked toward Michael. Not the measured walk of a television host, maintaining show pace, but the urgent stride of a human being recognizing someone in crisis. The studio fell silent as all protocols were abandoned. "Michael," Steve said softly, reaching the podium. "What did you just say?" Behind the scenes, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He looked up at Steve, tears streaming down his face, and let 5 years of hidden guilt pour out. "5 years ago, I was driving home in the rain," he said, his voice breaking. "I was texting, not paying attention. I hit a little girl on her bike, 7 years old. Emma Rodriguez." The words came out like a dam bursting, carrying 5 years of poison with them. The confession echoed across the studio like a shockwave. Audience members gasped audibly, many covering their mouths in horror. Camera operators continued filming, knowing they were witnessing something far beyond entertainment. "I got out of my car and I saw her lying there," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger through the confession. "She was still breathing, still alive. But I panicked. I got back in my car and I drove away." The studio was completely silent. Steve Harvey, who had built a career on quick responses and perfect timing, found himself in territory no game show had ever prepared him for. This wasn't television anymore. This was a confession to vehicular homicide. "Michael," Steve said, his voice stripped of all performance. "Did she die?" The question was gentle, though he could already see the answer in Michael's devastated expression. "She died at the hospital 2 hours later," Michael whispered. "While I was home washing her blood off my car, while her parents were holding her hand and praying for a miracle I'd stolen from them." His hands shook as he spoke. Tony was staring in shock, learning for the first time why his brother had become a ghost of himself. He had watched Michael sink into depression, start drinking, quit his job, but never understood the weight of actual murder was crushing him. Steve looked at Tony, then back at Michael. In that moment, he understood something profound about the difference between guilt and responsibility, between remorse and justice. "And you never came forward?" he asked gently. "I was a coward," Michael replied. "I told myself it was an accident, that coming forward wouldn't bring her back. But the truth is I was just protecting myself. I chose my freedom over her justice." The self-hatred in his voice was devastating to hear. "Every day for 5 years I've driven past the memorial her parents put up on Maple Street," he continued. "Every day I see the flowers they leave, the teddy bears, the pictures of the little girl I murdered. And every day I tell myself, I'll turn myself in tomorrow." Steve Harvey had made people laugh for decades. But in this moment, he learned something about the difference between entertaining people and witnessing the deepest human confession. He did something unprecedented in television history. He looked directly at Michael with an expression of profound seriousness. "Michael, you know what you have to do," he said. "You know what Emma Rodriguez deserves, what her family deserves." It wasn't entertainment anymore, it was moral reckoning. The audience began to respond, not with applause, but with sounds of shock, of recognition that they were witnessing someone's soul being bared. Some people were crying, others looked angry, all of them understood they were seeing justice demand its due. "You've been carrying this alone," Steve continued. "But this isn't your burden to carry anymore. This is about Emma. This is about her parents, who never got to say goodbye because you drove away." But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, Michael just confessed to something unthinkable, to taking a life and hiding from the consequences for 5 years." His voice carried across the studio with the weight of moral authority. "This isn't about forgiveness. This isn't about redemption. This is about a 7-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez who died alone because someone chose cowardice over courage." The audience was completely silent now. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't inspiration. This was witnessing someone finally accepting responsibility for the unforgivable. "Michael," Steve continued, turning back to him, "Emma's parents have spent 5 years not knowing who took their daughter from them. They've spent 5 years wondering if the person who killed her feels any remorse, any guilt, any humanity. You can't bring Emma back. You can't undo 5 years of lies and cowardice. But you can finally give her family the truth they deserve." Michael was sobbing now, but these weren't tears seeking sympathy. They were tears of someone finally accepting that his comfort mattered less than justice, that his freedom was built on a child's grave. "I know what I have to do," Michael whispered. "I've known for 5 years. I just didn't have the courage." He looked directly into the camera. "Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, if you're watching this, I'm the one who killed Emma, and I'm finally ready to face what I've done." Steve reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of his phone, he pulled out his own business card. "Michael, this has my direct number," he said. "But you're not calling me, you're calling the Phoenix Police Department. Today, right now." The Martinez family, who had been watching this unfold from their podium, didn't move to comfort Michael. They stood in stunned silence, recognizing that some confessions don't deserve comfort, only consequence. "You know what?" Steve announced to the studio. "There are no winners today because a 7-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez lost her life 5 years ago, and her killer has been walking free while her family suffered without answers." The audience didn't rise to their feet. They didn't applaud. They sat in the gravity of witnessing someone finally choosing truth over self-preservation, justice over freedom. Steve didn't offer Michael his jacket. Instead, he stepped back from the podium. "Michael, you need to leave this studio and go directly to the police. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today, because Emma Rodriguez has been waiting 5 years for justice." As the cameras stopped rolling, something unprecedented happened. No one approached Michael with comfort or support. Security quietly escorted him from the studio, while audience members sat in stunned recognition of what they'd witnessed. Tony left separately, grappling with the knowledge that his brother was not just depressed, but a killer who had hidden his crime for years. The family reunion he'd hoped for had become a moral reckoning he never could have imagined. The episode never aired. The confession was turned over to Phoenix police, who arrested Michael Davis that same day. He was charged with vehicular homicide and fleeing the scene of a fatal accident. Michael pled guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, but more importantly, Emma Rodriguez's parents finally had answers. They finally knew that their daughter hadn't died alone and forgotten, that someone carried the weight of her death every day. The Rodriguez family attended Michael's sentencing. They didn't forgive him. They didn't offer comfort, but they looked him in the eyes as he apologized, and for the first time in 5 years, Emma's death was acknowledged by the person responsible. Today, Michael serves his sentence at Arizona State Prison. He writes letters to the Rodriguez family that they don't answer, but he writes them anyway because Emma deserves to be remembered by the person who took her life. Steve Harvey never speaks publicly about that day, but the experience changed how he approaches his role as a host. He learned that sometimes television becomes a confessional, and hosts become witnesses to things that transcend entertainment. The studio audience from that day were sworn to confidentiality, but many sought counseling to process witnessing a murder confession. They learned that some secrets are too heavy for the people carrying them, and sometimes truth demands its own justice. Michael's story proves that guilt is not justice, that remorse is not restitution, that carrying the weight of a crime doesn't absolve the criminal, only finally accepting consequence does. Because Michael Davis wasn't just a man haunted by his past. He was a killer who chose his freedom over a child's justice for 5 years. And sometimes, the most important truth is that some people deserve to carry their guilt straight to prison, where it belongs. Emma Rodriguez was 7 years old when she died. She loved unicorns and wanted to be a veterinarian. She had just learned to ride her bike without training wheels. She was somebody's everything, and she deserved better than dying alone because someone was too cowardly to face what they'd done. And sometimes justice delayed is still justice. Even when it comes through a game show confession, even when it takes 5 years, even when it's delivered by someone who should have spoken the truth the night a little girl died under his car.